Hey friends. Hey friends, welcome to Words, where we look at the stories that define us and why they work so well. Now this week, I'm going to do a segment called Book Stack, because if you're like me, you no longer store books on your shelves necessarily, but you have a huge stack of books beside your bed. I'm going to look at a number of the books that I have in my book stack and why I think they are great and why you should read them. This week, I'm just going to look at some US and Australian authors. Later on in the series, I will be looking at some other authors that I love from countries around the world, but today it is just the US and Australia. I'm going to start with the Australian book. All of these books have either been published in the last 12 months or are by authors who have published in the last 12 months. So they are quite relevant and to me represent really the best of what our literary culture has to offer at the moment. I'm going to start with the books from Australia because I am Australian and I think Australian authors are awesome. First author I want to talk about today is Hannah Kent. So Hannah Kent is something of a celebrity in Australia. She was published when she was quite young with her debut novel Burial Rites, which is about an Icelandic woman who is accused of murder. And a lot of her stuff is based on real events or based on real communities or heavily based on research. Now, Burial Rites is awesome. It won a bunch of awards. Her second book, The Good People, was quite haunting and beautiful and tapped a bit into mythology and the dynamics of a community. And she's kind of brought a few of these elements into her latest novel, Devotion, but it also is a little bit different from what she has written so far. The main character in Devotion is called Hane, and she is from Prussia and quite a closed Lutheran community who travels by ship to Australia. And they settle in kind of north of Adelaide, kind of in the Adelaide Hills in South Australia, and it is based on a real community that exists today that was founded by the Lutherans that came by ship from Prussia when they were being persecuted. So a lot of her stuff is actually based on real evidence and real tales and the ship logs that happened on the way to Australia. It's fascinating stuff. And to hear her talk about it is really interesting. So I recommend that you Google an interview with her or a panel from a writers' festival or something to find out more about the background of this book because it's really interesting. Hane, now this book is about Hane and her relationship to a girl she meets in Prussia called Taya. And it's about how this relationship really impacts on Hane's life and the story of that relationship and I suppose the kind of waves it has in the community, but also it's the story of the community itself establishing this settlement in kind of a vast, wild, remote land. I just want to read you the opening paragraph because I think it will really take you straight into the richness of Hannah Kent's prose and why her writing is so enthralling and engaging. Taya, there is no line in your palm I have not traced, no knuckle cracked unheard, and the blue of your eyes is the coffin lining of the world. I would they sing psalms to you, and the down upon your thighs, and the eyelashes that have fallen to the fields you have worked. I would they lay boughs upon knees bent to the soil hum of any place you have rested upon. Taya, if love were a thing, it would be the sinew of a hand stretched in anticipation of grasping. See, my hands, they reach for you. My heart is a hand reaching. Honestly, that kind of prose already brings a few tears to my eyes. It's so beautiful and so rich in its connection. And another thing about this book that is incredible is Hane kind of has this this gift called synesthesia where she hears in colors. And so the hearing and the soundscape and the natural beauty that surrounds her feature really significantly in this book. Add into that gorgeous prose that you've just heard and make this a really rewarding, moving reading experience. And if you haven't picked it up already, Hannah and Taya have an intimate, beautiful relationship. Another book I want to talk about is by Emily Bitto, another wonderful Australian author. She won the Stella Prize a few years back with her debut novel, The Strays, which was based on real events, kind of set among the Heidi art community in Melbourne, which was a modernist art movement, and about kind of the families and the relationships that happened there. It's a really fascinating book. I recommend you read it. Now, this is her second novel. It was released last year, and contrastingly, it's actually set in America, where a guy moves to New York and he's kind of experiencing this American odyssey, and he starts to travel, and he meets this guy called Wayne, who is a little bit interesting. He's a Vietnam vet, and he has this fascination with wild animals. And if any of you have seen kind of the Netflix series Tiger King and the like, then you'll understand the kind of character that she draws in Wayne, and possibly have a hint at the interesting events that will unfold as the narrative progresses. Her first novel was based around female protagonists, whereas this one is male protagonist. The first one was set in Australia, this one's set in America. However, it still has that kind of lush rendering and emotional subtlety, but connection between the two characters, and it is quite compelling in terms of the story that it tells about our society and the chaos and the train wreck of modern capitalism, I suppose. That's all I'm going to say about it. A fascinating book. I recommend you get a hold of it. The third book I'm going to talk a bit about is called My Heart is a Little Wild Thing by Nigel Featherstone. A beautiful title for a beautiful book. It's very loosely based on parts of Nigel's life. However, it is a work of fiction, and it talks about the relationship of a man and his mother, and an identity kind of crisis and a relationship breakdown that leads him to go and kind of search for himself in another place and be surrounded by beautiful Australian landscape. And in particular, he comes across this creature, the quokka. And if you're Australian, you know what a quokka is, and you know how beautiful those animals can be. And the symbolism and the significance of the quokka has already been kind of a bit of a touch point for this novel. This is Nigel's second novel, his first being Bodies of Men, which is also captivatingly beautiful and is about male relationships during wartime. I'm not going to give too much away about this, but I might just read the opening paragraphs of this one to give you a little taste. The day after I tried to kill my mother, I tossed some clothes, a pair of hiking boots, a baseball cap, and a few toiletries into my backpack and left at dawn. I was only a kilometre down the road when my mobile rang, my sister's name appearing on the dashboard screen. Olivia is an early riser like me. She has rarely had a choice. But back then, she only ever phoned me after hearing there had been a family drama over in the east. I was on the verge of answering the call when I decided that I did not want to be compelled to turn around. I had to keep heading south. I let the call go through to voicemail, then pressed harder on the accelerator pedal. This is set in the southern areas of New South Wales. It really vividly depicts Australian families and how we deal with each other and the landscape and wild animals and ourselves when we find ourselves alone. I highly recommend it. My final Australian recommendation is this anthology by Mykaela Saunders called This All Come Back Now. It's a wonderful, incredible journey into all its different iterations of future Australia, seen from these really beautiful, emerging and established Indigenous voices. It's an incredible project that Mykaela Saunders undertook while completing a PhD. Had a lot of other projects going on. She managed to pull this together and create a truly remarkable work of literature. I highly recommend you read it. There are some really beautiful descriptions of future Australia, some confronting ideas, some really different styles and tones. It really is a testament to editing capabilities and the authors called upon that make this work so holistic and so powerful and moving. The name and a voice to what and to listen to, and I don't doubt that you will love this anthology, so I highly recommend it. The last three books on my bookshelf are from US authors, and they're a bit of a range of different genres, but a lot of fun. Now, the first one is George Saunders' A Swim in a Pond in the Rain, which is his kind of collection of research and musings and lessons that he teaches on Russian literature and how various different authors have created scene and character and powerful narrative through their use of language, theme, and symbolism. It's a really beautiful, fascinating read, something that's really helpful, especially if you are a student of English literature or creative writing yourself. You'll really find many, many gems in this book. George Saunders is a name you might recognize. He won the Booker Prize a couple of years ago for Lincoln in the Bardo, which if you have not read it, I cannot recommend that book highly enough. It is probably one of my all-time favorite books, Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders. And the audiobook, and you don't often hear this about a novel, the audiobook is almost like just as good as reading the text itself, because it is performed by all these brilliant actors, and because it reads a bit like a play, to hear it performed by these different characters is really quite engaging and moving and incredible. George Saunders is an author to check out if you don't already know him, and this one is particularly beautiful and wonderful if you are interested in language, literature, books, or writing yourself. My second one here today is a little bit of a digression. Stephen King's fairy tale. I will devote an entire episode to Stephen King later on in this year, because I think he is one of the all-time greatest storytellers. And I do not say that lightly. I think his work is remarkable, and there is a lot to be gleaned from it, and there's a lot that it says about contemporary society and about the wonders of imagination, to be perfectly honest. His fairy tale is about a young boy who discovers kind of a key to a different world that is going through some kind of chaos or conflict, and about the part that he plays in it. As usual, it's really about the boy himself and about the journey that he's going on. This lovely connection to the owner of the key when he passes. All of these lovely, nostalgic, writerly references that he seems to throw into a lot of his stories. Fascinating, beautiful, and engaging. I highly recommend it. My last book is called A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles. If you don't know who Amor Towles is, then you're crazy. He's just published his most recent book, The Lincoln Highway, which is an astonishing book. The reason I'm reading this, which is his second novel, is because it's going to be turned into a TV series starring Kenneth Branagh, of all people. It really is quite different to his other two novels. So he's published 3 novels. He's published a bunch of other stuff as well, but 3 full-length novels. The first one, Rules of Civility, is kind of become a modern classic. It's set in the 20s in New York City. It's got this female protagonist, Katie Content, and it kind of really looks at the rise and fall of certain classes during the 20s. And it's very beautiful and very moving and very thematic, and all his stuff is really set is really embedded firmly in the time and the location and the culture in which he's writing. This is no different. A Gentleman in Moscow is set, really it begins in the 20s, it concludes in the 50s. It's set in Moscow in Russia in a hotel. We have an aristocrat who has been confined to house arrest within the hotel metropole, and about the kind of life that he leads there, the various intrigues and relationships and things that happen to him, and the ultimate climax, which is quite thrilling, might I say. It is a thriller, and it's very, very enjoyable. And the fascinating thing about it is that the moment that this book concludes, so the concluding scene of this book is actually also the concluding scene in terms of time for the Lincoln Highway. And it's pretty astonishing when you read both books and you see how they match up, because the Lincoln Highway is set back in America. It's set in the 50s. It kind of begins in the middle of America, and it's a bit of a road trip, a subverted road trip novel. To see the parallels that are drawn between this novel and the Lincoln Highway, and also between this novel and the Rules of Civility, also between Rules of Civility and the Lincoln Highway, where you have a family generationally that crosses both narratives. It's really fascinating to see an author have such fun with 3 really different narratives and connecting them and with the world that he has kind of created. So I highly recommend this. A very enjoyable read. That concludes Bookstack, a feature I would like to have regularly and look at some of the books that I have on my bedside table. I hope that you've enjoyed it. This has been Words. My name is Elise James. If you liked this, please subscribe and like us, and check out our socials. Thanks so much, and see you next time. That was like black for heart. settled and I do.